Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming today. My name is Tsibulskaya. I'm a software engineer at Wix.com, and I want to talk today about screenshots and automation testing, when, how, and why we're using it at Wix. First of all, a bit about Wix. A bit about Wix when my clicker will work. No. That's okay. So, hi. Sorry for technical things. Anyway, we're at Wix building a website builder. Basically, it's our main product, but generally, we're helping our users to build their online business and online presence. Wix Engineering now is counting more than 500 developers and engineers, and we're located in different countries. I'm from Israel, for example. And my agenda for today is to talk firstly about debugging, then about some testing with screenshots, and just a small summary. But before I start talking about debugging, I want to ask you a question. Have your tests ever failed? I know that probably you will answer never because you never wrote any bugs and so on. But I have a story behind that question because I started working at Wix like 4 years ago as a manual QA. And at some point of my career, I needed to start writing automation tests because, you know, you can't do everything manually. Anyway, when I wrote my first automation tests, they worked. I was really surprised with that fact, and I was really happy. But then, when I tried to run it on a remote server, they all failed. And before that, I was really thinking that tests shouldn't fail if they're working somewhere. So I came to guys from our automation team, and they said that, yes, that's basically normally. Tests can fail in different environments, and by environment, it can be operation system, browser, version of Chrome, version of Selenium. Basically, whatever difference you have, it can affect your test, and that's OK, that's normal. But as a manual QA, I couldn't imagine how can I debug my tests remotely, because I mean, I'm used to see things. I'm used to open my browser to check what's going on there and feel and see if there is some bugs or not. And when test is running on remote machine, yeah, I can add console log. I can add some pauses and try to understand what's going on there. But basically, there is a problem to find the exact reason of failure on remote machine. And our solution for that problem was just to visualize it. If you can see what's going on the remote machine, it means that you can basically see why test is failing and what's wrong there. I want to give you some example. For example, I have a test which checks that when you're typing more than 300 characters in the input field, it shows you an error. An error in that specific case means that you're seeing a red border, a red icon, and a tooltip which explains you what exactly is broken. And of course, I have a failing test. That's basically a log from our TeamCity server. And it just says that no element found using a locator Wix tooltip, which means that probably there is no tooltip. But as a QA, of course, we have more than one reasons of failure usually. So possible reasons why this test can fail with such log, with such error message is, first of all, the submit button just didn't work, which means that you entered 300 characters, clicked submit, and it just didn't work, so then you don't see a tooltip because it just didn't work. Or another scenario is that there was no error at all. So you submitted, it was accepted, and everything was green and OK. Another case, there was an error, but no tooltip on it, which means that, yes, you got an error, red border, and an icon, but no tooltip. Or there was a tooltip, but something in test is incorrect, which means that either you're looking for incorrect selector, or, I don't know, it's an iframe or something like that. And the power of screenshot is basically you can see what exactly happened. So actual screenshot is showing an error, but not showing a tooltip. And as we expected it to be, we expected to see a tooltip. So probably now you want to ask how we're making screenshots. We created an open source library, which you're also welcome to use, which is called Screenshot Reporter. It's a Jasmine reporter for creating a screenshot, and basically it also creates a HTML capture for every failed test, which means that when you're running your tests, if test is failing, this Jasmine reporter just catch an event and makes a screenshot of what you're seeing on the screen. You can install it with npm, just add the reporter to your protractor conf. It's for JavaScript. And basically, if you want, just run it locally, that's it. But it was built for running on remote machines. So for running on remote machines, you need to add 2 more environment variables, screenshot-based directory, which is passed to where you want to save your screenshots, and screenshot remote link. It's just a base URL from which you can accept the screenshots where you saved it. It's under Wix folder in GitHub, so you're welcome to check it and use, as I said. And basically, how this screenshot thing can help. First of all, it's visualization. You can just see with your eyes what's going on there and what happened. It's less time spent for debugging a test code because, as I shown before, we had 4 different reasons, and for debugging each of these 4 reasons, we needed to do some work and spend some time. And basically, with a screenshot, you can see that it's only 1 out of 4 and spend less time for debugging it. Also, it can be kind of version control. What I mean here is that if you're running in some remote server, Jenkins or TeamCity somewhere, you have some history. And if you have screenshots in that history, you can see which changes changed your UI, which commit did that change to your UI, and what happened there, who broke it, who fixed it, how fixed it, and so on. And also, it can be a trigger for synchronizing of testing environment. Here I mean that probably if you are not updating automatically browsers on your remote machine, and we are, for example, not doing it because we want to check that our bugs caused by us are not by automatic update of a browser. So at some point, you can just forget that you're running a Firefox 3 on your remote server. And then when you are seeing a screenshot that your CSS rendered differently or the page is just not rendered and so on, you can see that, OK, guys, we need to update. I want to show some live example. I hope it will work. So I created a small example project. It has just a file with a configuration. And in configuration, you can see I already added a screenshot reporter. And I have just one test, which is an example test, which opens Google and checks that under a Google logo, you have a text containing Deutschland, because we're in Germany now. So let's run it. OK, it doesn't have Deutschland because now it's a doodle instead of a Google logo. But we can see the test failed, and it couldn't find the element using some locator. And again, we don't know either the element wasn't there or it was incorrect selector or what happened. So it wrote that in a test log that test failed, and it created a screenshot for it. And basically, in the project, you have a new folder which is called test Italy screenshots, because usually in our projects, we already have test Italy folders, so we're just creating a screenshot folder. And on a screenshot, you can see that it shows a Google Doodle and not just a Google Deutschland. So that's why our test failed. Oops. So basically, when you're having a screenshot on failure of a test, you just don't need to guess anymore, no magic and no console logs. And the second part, what I wanted to talk, is about testing. Basically, when I finally made my test work without any failing, I mean flakiness and just code reason of failing, I realized that, OK, perfect. Now as a manual QA, I have a less job because finally my work is automated. And I probably don't need to do any sanity and anything. I just can test new features and enjoy my life. Which is basically a dream of any manual QA. But I forgot about one small thing, which is browsers, cross browsers, basically. And the problem is not that my test couldn't run in any of that browsers. The problem was that even when they are running there, I can't be sure that everything is OK, because things are rendering differently in different browsers. And of course, when I'm running the same test, which checks, for example, that there is some text in Chrome and Internet Explorer, I can't basically say that in Internet Explorer this text will be shown with the same font, with the same styling, in the same place, and so on. So we started thinking about UI testing. And we got the problem that UI testing is pretty difficult to automate. Because first of all, we tried just to automate it with the code. I mean, getting CSS selectors, checking that these CSS selectors, not CSS selectors, just CSS, that it's the CSS we want to be there, and that it works. But again, it's not basically giving you an ability to be sure that it works as expected. So our solution for that was using Applitools Eyes. Who've been yesterday on a talk of their own? Great. So you already heard about Applitools, but for those who wasn't there, Applitools is a testing tool for automatically checking all the visual aspects of basically any applications, web, mobile, and desktop, just like a human eye does it. You can check their sites. Our Applitools experience at Wix is running from 500 until 1,000 tests per day. We're checking 4 different browsers: Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Safari. Basically, we count it as 6 browsers because we're checking few versions of Safari and also checking Edge and few versions of Internet Explorer, so it's even more. We're checking 16 different languages because Wix is translated to 16 languages. And we're working with Applitools with 2 programming languages. We have a framework for Java and for JavaScript for writing tests. This is an example test from Applitools site. Yesterday, you could see it also on Doron's presentation. What it does, it's just have a test which opens an Angular page and creates a screenshot of it, not Angular protractor. But you can see that it's pretty big test, to be honest. That's how the same test looks at Wix, how we write the same test at Wix. Our main magic and the main idea is our open source library, which calls eyes-it. The main purpose of it is to be able to make any of your regular IT tests to be visual tests. So basically, we already have some number of tests, just standard Jasmine-it tests, which are running on our developers' environments or on production to check that it's working, basically. And when we added a visualization, we just wanted to add eyes before the tests we already have, and it should just work. So you also can use it. You can install it with npm. You need to export your API key from which you're getting on Applitools site. And then you just need to set a variable which called eyes and write eyes before each of your it. And again, I want to show some live demo how it works. The same test, basically, what we already saw, which opens Google and expect to contain Deutschland. Let's add here eyes. Okay. How the ApplyTools works, basically when you run a test first time, it creates a screenshot which is counted as a baseline, which you can save as a baseline. And then all the next runs of your test, it compares your new screenshot to that baseline which you had, which you saved before. As you can see now in a message in a test log that test failed because it's a new test ended. And here is a link which we can check why it failed exactly. So that's a dashboard of ApplyTools. As you can see, this test is marked as a new. And there is no expected image because there is no baseline for that screenshot. But we can see that the screenshot was created correctly, so I basically can just save it. And let's rerun the test. Let's delete my expect because it's anyway failing. And let's rerun the test to see that it will compare it correctly. As you can see, it takes more time to add visual tests to your regular test because a test without visualization was running faster. But we checked a performance on real projects. We added like 150 visual tests, and it added just 20 seconds of performance to the full build time, which is basically OK for us. I mean, we have a build running for 6 minutes, and 20 seconds is not that bad. Test failed. Let's check why. OK, because the image is moving, because it's a doodle. But I wanted to show you that ApplyTools have a different matching levels, which means that you can compare your images, not just exact pixel to pixel or strict, which is not allowing you to have any differences there. But also, it has a layout, which you can see that if you're selecting layout, the test is basically passing. There is no difference. And probably you have a question why, because layout is just checking the layout. So it works for example, cross browsers and different languages, because it's not checking exactly that some word equals the same word. It can be that just the text area is there where you're expecting, the button is there where you're expecting, on the button there is some text, and so on. Like here, for example, it checks that there is an image, and also here you have an image, even though it's a bit different. And also, all the layout is still the same layout as it is. That also helps for us checking mobile, because it can be that some sites are rendering a bit differently on Android and iPhones. And when we're checking it in layout mode, because we basically care about layout much, if layout is similar, it will pass. Okay, let's continue with the presentation. So some tips and tricks for using ApplyTools, but basically it's not just for ApplyTools, but for any visual test which you have, because we tried before ApplyTools to write our own system for comparing screenshot. It didn't work that well, that's why basically we switched to ApplyTools. But the tips and tricks are totally the same. First of all, I don't suggest using the same baseline for running locally and on remote server. Why? Because first of all, locally, as a lot of developers using the same project, it can be different locally. For example, I'm running on my Mac and some other developer is running on his Dell laptop, for example, and it's already different operation system, and also it can be different version of browser, different screen resolution, and so on. So I suggest to keep your local baseline as your local baseline and compare what you see on your screen to what you previously saw on the same your screen. And the same goes for remote server. I don't suggest comparing remote server to your local environment. It's better to run one-time tests on remote server, make them failing, check that the baseline is basically what you want to see there, and then run your tests normally, and they will compare your remote server to your remote server. The same goes for not approving a baseline automatically, because when you approve your baseline automatically, Applitools gives this ability just to run the first time it will fail, but automatically set it as a baseline. When you're running second time, you can't know that everything was okay, and that your baseline is basically what you expected to be there, because it can be that some component just didn't load at that time when you created a baseline. And then all the next tests you're making, it expects there to be a loader and not your component. And if you have a loader, it will pass, but basically you're not expecting to see there a loader, you want to see your component. So I suggest not to approve baselines automatically, just come check it. It's not taking that much time of your time, but it will pay you back. Choose your matching level accordingly to needs of your project. As I shown before, Applitools has a different matching levels. So basically, we at Wix found that we don't need to check for all the projects for all the time, test with the same matching level, because, for example, for a project with a news feed where we're showing a user some news of Wix, we just expect it to be some strict layout with some image and the text near image, but we don't care much about the image and the text itself because it's a newsfeed. It can be updated. We don't want our tests to fail each time we're updating a news. But for example, for some UI components, for example, some button, we have a very strict design rules. So we want to see that this button looks exactly the same on all browsers, with exactly the same shadows, with exactly the same font on it, and so on. So then we're using a strict, which is working as a human eye. And if for some projects, for example, for comparing images in our private media, we want to see that when we are re-rendering image, it still stays the same pixel to pixel. So we're checking it in pixel to pixel mode to see that it's totally different. Oh, not different, similar, sorry. And also I suggest not to use ignored areas too much. It goes, as I said, not only for Applitools, but if you need to ignore some parts of your screenshot, and these ignored parts are a bigger part of your screenshot, it means that something is wrong with your test, because basically, if you're ignoring too much, it means that either you're making a screenshot of not what you want to test, which means that probably you need to make a screenshot not of the full screen, but of some specific components on the screen, or it can mean that the test is just useless because what are you testing if all of the screenshot is ignored? So as I said, don't use ignored areas too much, because if you do, it means that something is wrong with the test. Short summary, again, why we're using screenshots and why we need it. First of all, for easy debugging. As I shown you before, it takes you less time to debug and to understand what's going on there and what was on your screen when you couldn't basically see your screen. Front-end developers can rely on tests because usually you can't say that you have 100% coverage, test coverage. And when you don't have 100% of test coverage, even though you're writing TDD and you have a lot of tests, you can say that the code you're pushing to production won't break anything. And when you have UI tests, it basically shows you, it gives you more. We suggest to use less number of visual tests than you have a number of E2E tests, which means that visual tests should be on the top of the testing pyramid. But if you have it, it already can give you better coverage, and you can start relying on your tests. As I said, it gives the full automation coverage because you're not testing just the code. You're not testing just the behavior of your application and not just the functionality. You also check how it looks. So basically, you're covering everything. It's easy maintenance because, for example, for Apply Tools, it has a dashboard where you can just approve, decline, add some areas to see what's going on there, to check some previous steps, what was before and previous version of your application. And it's very fast and easy just to see if your failing tests were failing because you created a new feature or because it's a real bug. You can just have a list of all the pages of your application where there is the same bug, for example, so you won't need to check every and single screenshot to see that it's the same bug all over the application. So it's pretty easy and pretty fast. And also, it's less chance of human error because if you're automating things, it's already less chance of human error. If you can automate UI testing, it's a less chance of human error of some QA error, for example. Some useful links, again, for both of the libraries which are shown, the Screenshot Reporter and IZIT. As I said, they're open source, so you're welcome to check it, to use it, and send pull requests to it, of course, as any open source. And thanks.